Denn als erstes hat das Wort.
So, first to speak for the Commission is the High Representative Josep Borrell von Telles.
Bitte schön. No problem.
Dear President, Excellencies, more than 6 months after the Hamas terrorist attack that we continue condemning in the strongest possible terms, the war started in Gaza. This is a watershed moment for the Middle East. We had yesterday the meeting with the Gulf countries, and this was very high in our agenda. The recent Iranian strike against Israel was also a clear escalatory attack, but we must not forget at the same time the gravity of human suffering in Gaza. The figures are there, more than 34,000 people killed, mostly civilian, women, children, twice this number wounded, 75% of the population displaced, at the brink of famine. We know that dozens of children have been already starved to death. The cities in Gaza have been more destroyed than the German cities during the Second World War. Just imagine the comparison. A recent interim damage assessment by the World Bank and by the United Nations, which has been supported financially by the European Union, assessed the direct damage of about 90 billion. This would be the cost of rebuilding the infrastructure of Gaza, the way it was at the end of January. So imagine now much worse. We can say that more than 60% of the physical infrastructure has been damaged and 35% fully destroyed. At least 249 aid workers have been killed. I'm talking about aid workers. According to the United Nations, since the 7th of October, among them 181 are United Nations staff. And I think that we have to pay tribute to all 8 agencies, including UNRWA, which UNRWA alone has lost 178 employees. Then come these Israeli strikes against a convoy of the World Central Kitchen that killed 7 humanitarian workers while they were delivering aid to the most vulnerable in Gaza. But keep in mind, we were very moved by these 7 people being killed, but before them, there were 249 also being killed. And maybe we were not as moved. And people around the world say, yes, that's very bad. These 7 humanitarian workers deserve all our homage, but keep in mind that together they were 249 more. Together with Commissioner Lenarčič, we publicly call for a credible investigation. We are also appalled by the number of journalists and media workers which has been killed by the strikes in Gaza. About 100 journalists and media workers, as per Reporters Without Borders recount, in less than 6 months. This is unprecedented. Journalists are civilians and their voices are crucial to keeping this information at bay and citizens being informed. And we are also concerned about the newly adopted legislation giving temporary power to the Israeli government to prevent foreign media networks from operating in Israel. This, coupled with the lack of access to foreign media to Gaza, raises further concern about what do we know about what's going there. We have to repeat once again that Israel must respect international law to implement the International Court of Justice provisional measures, ensure the protection of all civilians, allow humanitarian workers to do their life-saving job without being targeted. For the first time, the Israeli Defense Forces recognizes that it was a dramatic error, that it was a mistake, the killing of these humanitarian workers. The question is how many mistakes have been happening before without being recognized. We insist on the fact that journalists have to be protected and to grant access to Gaza to ensure the freedom of press. The European Union Council has insisted, and I am here representing the common ground of all member states, according with the conclusions of the European Union Council, that an immediate humanitarian pause leading to a sustainable ceasefire, unconditional release of hostages and the provision of humanitarian assistance is the guidelines of the European Union as decided by the European Council on last 17th of April. But we have to do more and ask everybody to do more to protect civilians and agent humanitarian catastrophe by increasing the flow of humanitarian aid, which is not unimpeded, which is not an obstacle. Yes, there are obstacles. And yesterday, my colleague Narjik was explaining the number of conditions that this aid has to fulfill in order to be allowed to come into Gaza. We need more access by land roads, more access points. The recent decision by Israel to open the Ashdod port and the Erez crossing points are positive news, but they have to be implemented. It's not a matter of announcing, it's a matter of doing. And by the time being, is doing in a very slow pace and very low quantity. This is a fact. Quicker checks and better distribution remains crucial to alleviate people's suffering, and it's crucial that Israel comply with United Nations Security Council binding resolution 2728 demanding full humanitarian access. And on that also the Europeans are fully behind. Finally, a ground operation in Rafah must be avoided. There are more than 1.3 million people on the streets of Rafah without no more shelter than a piece of plastic over their heads. And humanitarian consequences would be catastrophic. Everybody is saying that. The US, the European Union, member states. We insisted on the G7, we insisted on the Foreign Affairs Council. Let's see that this is not going to happen. And then we have to say that the work of UNRWA has to be supported. And yesterday, the former Minister Catherine Colonna report that Secretary General Guterres tasked her on doing has been issued. And I think that it's important to read this report. It's important to know what this very independent and very professional group of people have been studying and what they tell us. I think there is a strong convergence of views between the analysis and recommendation of this independent review group with the measures that we have been discussing at the European Union institutions. We are now waiting to see how do we continue our cooperation with UNRWA. Because what the report says is that they haven't found any proof of the accusations done against some workers of UNRWA. And that, yes, there is some problems of political neutrality, but this is one thing, and another thing is to participate in the terrorist attacks of the 7th of October. And we welcome the UNRWA cooperation, and as Mr. Colonna said, it is an irreplaceable safe line for hundreds of thousands of people, calling the international community to fund UNRWA in order to make this institution to continue their work. I have to pay tribute to the 7 humanitarian workers killed when they were working for the World Central Kitchen, but also to the 249 people who were killed before. I have to pay tribute to all the victims of the Hamas attack and the Israeli army against Gaza, to more than 100 journalists and media reporters, and we have to ask for this tragedy to end. And I repeat, the European Union Council asked for the implementation of the United Nations resolutions, asked for immediate release of the hostages, asked for more access for humanitarian support, asked for a humanitarian pause that brings to a permanent ceasefire, and most important, asked to look for a political solution. We cannot say this is just a humanitarian problem. It is, and it has to be immediately faced. But it is a political problem. And we have to join our forces, as we agreed to do yesterday with the Gulf countries, in order to look for a political solution that can only be based, I believe, we believe at the European Union, on the two-state solution. And if there is someone who doesn't believe on that solution, then he has to tell us which is the alternative. You don't want the Palestinians to have their own state in order to live in peace and security side by side with Israel? If you don't want this solution, you have to tell the international community which other solution you have in mind in order to ensure peace, prosperity, and security for these two people that for too many years have been fighting for the same land. We condemn all terrorist activities, but we want humanitarian law being respected. And we want the hostilities to stop, humanitarian support to come in, the hostages being released, and a political process to put in place in order to look for a political solution to this dramatic war. Thank you.
Dankeschön. Für die EVP-Fraktion.
Thank you very much. Next for the EPP, Mr. Lopez Isturiz White.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The tragic events on the 2nd when 7 staff members of the World Central Kitchen were killed by an Israeli strike are regrettable and unacceptable. The distinctions that we have to make is the reaction. Whereas Hamas and Hezbollah terrorist attack butcher innocent civilians and show absolutely no regret, a democratic country, Israel, which is fighting a difficult war to neutralize terrorist groups and recover their abducted civilians, shows accountability and regret. Israel admitted its terrible mistake. It carried out an investigation that showed that the officers in charge of the strike were convinced that the cars were being used by Hamas, something that happens often. It dismissed and reprimanded officers involved in the operation. This will, of course, not bring back those who tragically lost their lives. But at least we know clearly what happened, and hopefully a similar tragic mistake like this will not happen again. This is what democracies do. The attempt of many to use these episodes to argue that Israel is deliberately targeting workers of these organizations, like those who easily use the word genocide, are wrong, irresponsible, and shameful. What we do not know, or if there are any regrets or investigation, is after the bombing by the Islamic Jihad of a hospital at the beginning of the war. Hundreds died. Where is the investigation? Where is the regret? Abuse, rape, and torture of Israeli women. Where is the investigation? What is the regret? I have not heard anything here, also in this parliament, from many. What we do not know is where hundreds of hostages are. I think that we should focus on what we can do to reduce sufferance in the Middle East. And this will not happen only by accusing Israel of being a genocidal country who is deliberately killing aid workers. It is not true. Thank you very much.
Dankeschön. Nächste Rednerin für die S&D-Fraktion ist.
Thank you very much. Now for the S&D, Ms. Insia.
Den humanitära
We are talking about a humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza. Around 40,000 have been killed, a huge number of women and children. These are some of the highest fatality figures that we have seen for humanitarian aid workers and journalists. This is in our modern times. Almost 250 aid workers who have been killed and many journalists as well. This is an absolute shame that this has been going on for 6 months now. We saw EU member states freeze aid to UNRWA without Israel having to show any proof. The European Parliament will not show humanitarian assistance to those in Gaza. We need to see an immediate ceasefire. There is no time for business as usual. We need to freeze the EU-Israel Association Agreement. We need to provide support to those who are starving in Gaza. We need to end this bloody conflict on our continent. There are some who think it is okay to see this continue, and that's the scandal. Thank you.
Die Renew-Fraktion spricht.
Thank you. Now for the Renew Group, Ms. Woutmans.
Dank u wel, mevrouw de voorzitter, meneer Borrell.
Thank you very much, Madam President, Mr. Borrell, colleagues. For months now, we have been hearing catastrophic reports from Gaza. They're appalling. Are we really aware what's happening? More than 1 million people have left. Thousands of people have died, children under threat, and this is all happening in 2024. It's incredible. There's still a lack of humanitarian aid. There's not enough entering Gaza. There are more than 200 humanitarian workers have been killed. Humanitarian workers, journalists and civilians can never be the target of war. War has rules. And Mr. Borrell, it's not just the European Parliament, but the Security Council and the International Court of Justice is calling for immediate ceasefire and the release of all hostages by Hamas. This is the only way to prevent more suffering. I hope, Mr. Borrell, that on behalf of the European Union, you are going to ensure that Israel understands that if it does not listen to these calls, this will make the relationship much worse.
Gracias, Presidenta. The tragedy of Gaza seems to have no end. Just when it looks impossible for the suffering of Palestinians to increase, reality grounds us, with children killed in a playground or with mass graves under raised hospitals. No, the terrible massacre of October the 7th should never have happened, and neither should the carnage in Gaza, a disproportionate response that may amount to an unlawful collective punishment. We have seen in horror how aid workers have been targeted and killed by the IDF, how desperate citizens trying to collect something to eat were gunned down, how more than 100 journalists were assassinated, how indiscriminate bombings caused massacres of innocent civilians and unprecedented destruction. We have seen severe restrictions on humanitarian aid that deprives civilians of what they need to survive, putting them on the brink of famine. International law and international humanitarian law have been trampled upon. No, Hamas atrocities can never be justified. It was a horrendous terrorist crime, but Israel's conduct is unacceptable. International justice will have to rule on the possible war crimes committed by all the parties, and perpetrators will have to be held to account. The only way to truly weaken Hamas and ensure Israel's long-term security is by granting the two peoples, Israelis and Palestinians, the right to have their country. By neglecting the conflict while Keeping going with the occupation, today Israelis have less security and Palestinians less hope. So stop the war, release the hostages, and restore a political horizon to achieve the only viable and fair solution: 2 states for 2 peoples.
Dankeschön. Für die EKR-Fraktion.
Thank you very much. Now for the ECR, Mr. Tertsch.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. We're talking about stopping the war, releasing the hostages. Why don't we do the opposite? Release the hostages and then stopping the war. The campaign against Israel is unbeatable. We know that we have had unthinkable things here in Europe. We've seen in the streets of all of our capitals, we've got immigrants, Islamists who state that they want to destroy Israel, that they want Palestine from the river to the sea, i.e. wipe Israel off the map. And that's what we've seen in all European capitals with these accusations that we have against Israel, the fully ungrounded. Israel is defending itself. It is defending it against Iran. You know, Mr. Borrell, for so long, for those 5 years, you were protecting the most criminal regime in the region, those who kill yours, that kill their own people, their women, and want to destroy Israel. And you, sir, you are protecting them, both Iran and Hamas.
Danke. Für die ID-Fraktion spricht.
Thank you. Now for the ID, Ms. Bild.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam President. We should first of all pay tribute to the victims of the atrocities of the 7th of October and think of the 130 people who, according to information from the month of April, are still being held hostage by Hamas. And this is an estimated figure. These hostages need to be released immediately. In March, the humanitarian situation was disastrous, and there was warning of imminent famine in the north of the Gaza Strip. The humanitarian aid needs to be carried out in the best conditions possible. On the 9th of April, the Financial Times said that Israel had said that 322 lorries would enter Gaza. And this was the highest daily number since the beginning of the war. It also said that the road is the best, is the safest and more efficient and most profitable way of sending aid to Gaza. And this is what needs to be done so that convoys can enter under optimal security conditions for staff and so that enough aid, quality aid, is able to be distributed. I have often said here in this room that journalists need to be protected. They serve the general interest, and they often do it. They should be never done at the cost of their physical integrity or their lives.
Für die Linksfraktion.
Thank you very much. Now for the left, Mr. Pineda.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Mr. Borrell. Yesterday, we tried to make an addition to the plenary agenda. We wanted to have a debate on what measures the EU would take in order to implement the UN resolution and the ruling from the International Court of Justice. The majority of this parliament voted against. They did not allow us to have this debate because the response is none of these measures are going to be implemented. It is shameful that none of these measures will be implemented. We are discussing how aid workers are being killed, how journalists are being killed, members of civil society. We are talking about activists who are going to be part of a flotilla of freedom going towards Gaza, carrying a lot of humanitarian aid, but they are blocked there because Israel is saying they will attack them. and they previously killed 10 Turkish compatriots. So is the EU going to do anything to help those 500 Europeans who are part of this flotilla? Israel is a tumor in the Middle East. This genocide is being turned into a regional conflict, and we are being led towards a war between the Arabs and the Israelis. We're told that Israel is bringing stability to the region. There was they attacked the Iranian embassy. So what is the EU going to do? The speaker has been cut off.
Please. Point of order by colleague Al-Shahini. Please. Yes, a point of order. Is it a point of order?
Thank you. Yes, it's a point of order, Madam Chair. I want to make you aware of the statement given by my colleague calling Israel as a cancer in the Middle East. I would like to see you if you could investigate this as an anti-Semite speech, because I, myself, who is from the region, do not accept that kind of speech towards Israel. Thank you.
Thank you. We will investigate this in the Bureau. No, thank you. Your speaking time is way up.
Vale, pensaba...
No, that was not a question. No era una pregunta. Die nächste Rednerin ist...
The next speaker is Ms. Ferrara on behalf of the non-attached members.
Grazie, Presidente. Thank you very much, President. The horror of civilian killings in Gaza, and the population is being starved of every single thing it needs. Now, we know that around 200 humanitarian aid workers have been killed, and dozens of journalists, and then all of the Palestinian deaths. The international community has condemned the attack after the 7th of October. Now, we have to do more to build peace and to uphold international humanitarian rights. We need targeted efforts. Suspending the EU-Israel Association Agreement, as stated by the rapporteur from the UN on Palestine. Now, we also need to stop any export of any types of weapons or ammunition from the European Union that should never be used for war crimes. Now, the future in our relations with neighboring countries will depend very much on our ability to act now without waiting for further massacres. Thank you.
Wie immer werde ich ab jetzt ein bisschen...
Thank you. As always, I'm going to be a little bit stricter with speaking time. It's now Mr. Mandel.
Thank you very much, President, dear colleagues, dear Commissioner, High Representative Josep Borrell. First of all, let me say, while I disagree nearly in each policy area with you and your policies, no matter whether it was Russia in the past, the Middle East, the Western Balkans, whatever, since this is the final plenary sitting of this mandate, I thank you for your contribution to this European project, and I encourage you to listen to the Parliament and to the people more, than we can go forward. For the region, the Middle East, we had a positive period of time when the Abraham Accords were spread. It was a time where peace was available, I would say, and we have to go back there. Israel will go back there, I have no doubt on that. And I'm sure that it's revealed now to the world that the Iranian regime has been behind this for many years, behind Islamism, terrorism, anti-Semitism all over the world via its different proxies. What is the future perspective for the region? High Representative, it's demilitarization, or better to say, de-weaponization of all Palestinian territories, because it's not a regular state structure, it's de-weaponization, then creating a civil society, then make sure that not the whole world for decades have to pour money in, like it was in the past, then creating economic strength for the region itself, and then a security guarantee for Israel, the only democracy in the region, our partner state, and then a two-state for the time being. There is no both-sidism correct if I listen to some speakers in this parliament. What we need is a strong alliance with Israel.
Dankeschön. Nächster Redner ist der Kollege.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Luena.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you very much, President. We have our new Franco MEP who left without even waiting to hear your response. It seems sometimes we hear two voices from the EU, and I prefer your narrative than from Metsola or von der Leyen. I think it's important the type of language that we use. We're talking about a massacre in Rafah now. That is what is we are moving towards. So we're talking about a humanitarian disaster. Secondly, sanctions against the Israeli government, and to talk about having a new, more restrictive diplomatic relations, and also to look at relations with the Palestinian state. That's the response that Israel will understand, and that's what the Spanish government has done. This is work you have been doing over the last years, and I hope this will continue over the next months. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Ms. Yenbu.
Monsieur le Commissaire.
Thank you, Commissioner. 6 months of war, 6 months of human catastrophe. We've seen many hostages, famine, lack of care. We've seen destruction of buildings, hospitals. 1.7 million Palestinians have had to flee. The colonization as well, the settlements in the West Bank. This is the most lethal conflict for journalists ever, according to the UN. The international law, based on the resolution from the UN last year, needs to be applied to have an immediate and long-lasting safe ceasefire and to have all hostages released. I'd like to congratulate the Colonna report, those who drafted it, who investigated the role of UNRWA. The only way is a two-state solution to promote security and dignity of all. We need to have the courage to focus on a future where peace and security prevail for both peoples. Thank you. Thank you. The next speaker is Ms. Stick.
Voorzitter, hoge vertegenwoordiger. Elke dag worden burgers.
Thank you very much, High Representative. Every single day, citizens, journalists, aid workers are killed in Gaza. Hunger is used as a weapon of war. We have seen that, well, no more war, no more genocide. That was the foundation of the European Union, yet for months we have seen this time and time again, this aggressive war against Gaza. The United Nations have stated that it is more than plausible that it be genocide. We have to put as much pressure as possible on Israel, call for the permanent ceasefire, humanitarian aid, and respect and implementation of the ICJ ruling and the resolutions coming out of the United Nations. We need to recognize the state of Palestine. No more war, no more genocide. This promise will be worthless if we do nothing.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hakkarainen is next speaker.
Thank you, President. Now we're preparing a new Holocaust here. We have veiled it within a question and into many other actions that we're preparing here. It was once said that if the Arabs no longer have weapons, that we will have peace in the region, but if the Israelis no longer have weapons, there is no longer an Israel. The fact that the Hamas is hiding people with guns within the civilian population leads to this. Hamas has infiltrated the civilians, the hospitals, the schools, and the different aid organizations. Obviously, we will have victims then. We must bring the terrorists to account for this, for the massacre they did in October.
Daly.
Thank you. Ms. Daly is next speaker.
Thank you, President. What has been seen cannot be unseen, and the world can now see exactly what European values really are. 200 days of Israel systematically wiping Gaza from the earth, 505 bombs a day, 21 an hour, doctors executed, mass graves in hospitals, journalists murdered, and all the while with not just the silence, but the active complicity of the European Union. The European Union who flew the flag of the oppressor from day one, whose countries axed the funding to a starving Palestinian population despite any evidence of any wrongdoing from anyone against UNRWA, who increased the flow of weapons to Israel tenfold since they started a genocide, weapons to slaughter Palestinians. So keep your hand wringing and your crocodile tears. It couldn't have happened without your complicity. It's continuing now because of it. European values, same as it always was. Murder and colonialists, you'll never be forgotten.
The next speaker is Mr. Rivière.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Israel is a democracy. Hamas is a terrorist organization. Israel is a democracy. Hamas is a terrorist organization. If we mislabel things, we're just making things worse, as Camus said. So let's be clear. Israel is a democracy. Hamas is a terrorist organization. The fight in Gaza took place after atrocities committed the 7th of October by Hamas in Israel. So it's not a war between Israelis and Palestinians. It's just another chapter in democracy against these dark forces. In a few days, we are celebrating the fall of Nazism. The complete fall of this regime was the only way for us to have freedom in the West. The horrors of this war for the German people fortunately didn't stop our American allies. The capitulation of Hamas is something which is desirable, not just for Israel, but for the preservation of our ideals of freedom. Israel is a democracy. Hamas is a terrorist organization.
Thank you. The next speaker is Ms. Dos Santos.
Senhora Presidente, Madam President, High Representative Mr. Borrell, we have to be clear. We have to be frank. Europe is not on the side of terrorists, but on the side of peace. Hamas is a terrorist group. The leaders abandoned their citizens. They live in luxurious dwellings, and they are at the origin of this destruction. Now, we know that Hamas is only worried about its own survival. Europe has to have the historic, ethical, moral to make sure that we free all hostages, both Palestinian and Israeli, those that have been held since the 7th of October. The international community and the humanitarian aid workers are victims of this terrorist organization. Ladies and gentlemen, Europe is a driving force of peace, and that is why Europe must be on the front line of defending democracy. Europe has the flag of dignity, of human dignity and freedom, and there's no freedom without security. We cannot forget that one of the great challenges of our time, is the grand challenges of democracy, is and will be defending peace, guaranteeing democracy, all the while upholding the security of our citizens, but without forgetting that we can never allow terrorism to prevail. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Santos is next.
Thank you, Madam President. Senhor Alto Representante.
High Representative, sir, this is the last chance that we will have to speak with you during this legislative period, allow me to state that I'd like to really underscore the fact that I fully agree and I fully support and I fully acknowledge the fact that you have been one of the most lucid voices that we've had from the European Union in this conflict in the Middle East. 40,000 dead. We have 200 journalists, more than 190 aid workers. This is what has happened on the Gaza Strip. The civilized world, for 6 months, we have seen all of the treaties, all of the conventions, and yet we have been looking at what is happening there in these conditions. The genocide of the Palestinian people. Now, there's been a resolution. We need to make sure that we uphold that resolution, the two-state solution to put an end to this slaughter. But to put an end to this slaughter, we need two things: an embargo, an arms embargo, and the suspension of the EU-Israeli Association Agreement.
Dankeschön. Nächster Redner ist der Kollege Andrews.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Andrews.
Madam President, High Representative and colleagues, the Kelowna report states that the government of Israel provided no evidence to support its claim that UNRWA staff were members of Hamas. Nevertheless, these claims led to an avalanche of condemnation of UNRWA by EU member states, by an avalanche of calls to suspend funding of UNRWA, regardless, it seems, of either the devastating humanitarian consequences or the absence of evidence. And if it's never the wrong time to do the right thing, then the right thing for Austria, Estonia, Finland, Germany, Italy, Latvia, Lithuania, the Netherlands, Romania and Sweden is to acknowledge that suspension was a mistake and that UNRWA is indispensable. To make matters worse, the US Congress last week passed a bill providing $26 billion in support to Israel and banning aid to UNRWA until 2025. It's difficult not to lose faith in the face of these circumstances, but as this will be my last speech on this issue, in this mandate at least, let me express my pride in the approach of the Irish Government, increasing aid to UNRWA, recognising Palestine and calling for a review of the EU-Israel Association Agreement. Thank you.
Dankeschön.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Saturi. Is there a limit to impunity? This is the question that Netanyahu challenges us with every single day. We've seen 35,000 deaths, 10% of journalists killed in Gaza. We've seen hospitals targeted. We've seen famine and a loss of hope. Every single day, the Israeli government is showing what it wants to do. It's ignoring what the international community is saying. And we must focus on peace and the civilian community. We need to combat what the settlers are doing in the West Bank by suspending the association agreement with Israel. We've seen non-proven allegations against UNRWA as well. Thank you very much, Commissioner. Thank you very much for sticking to your point and to also supporting our values. Thank you.
Dankeschön. Nächster Redner ist
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Omarjee.
Madame la Présidente, merci.
Madam President, thank you. Mr. Borrell, what do you need more than a genocide for Mrs. von der Leyen to finally act and to suspend the association agreement with Israel? What more is needed than 34,000 dead, 12,000 children murdered, and yesterday in Canyonez, a new mass grave was found with 200 dead. All of this is still not sufficient for Mrs. von der Leyen to suspend the association agreement. I'm asking you this question because I have written to the President of the European Commission, and on the 5th of April, I received a letter in response to my request to suspend the association agreement. President von der Leyen concludes her mail by saying that the EU does not envisage suspending this association agreement with Israel. And that is the response to what you have said here in this European Parliament. You say that there will be an inquiry to see if the clause on human rights will be respected. I think it's very clearly been violated, and I think that the EU, Madam President, needs to suspend this association agreement. Otherwise, we would lose all honour and all credibility in front of the European people. Thank you.
The next speaker is Mr. Giarrusso.
Devo ancora parlare.
I have to take the floor to talk about Gaza yet again. The 13,000 Palestinian kids, innocent children who were killed, women who were massacred by Israel, by the criminal policy of Netanyahu. To talk about the millions of Israelis around the world who are demonstrating against these policies because they are proud of being Jewish, and they cannot believe what their country is responsible for today. Now, when we are here in this hemicycle, stating the truth about Gaza seems to be a taboo. This is frightening. And Antonio Scurati, a writer in Italy, was censored on TV because he is anti-fascist. On the eve of the 25th of April, our national holiday in Italy. And I have to recall that we must fight for freedom, that Palestine should be able to live in peace and be free and have the chance to do whatever they believe. And in 2024, no one should be censored for being anti-fascist. And I would like to say, long live anti-fascism in Italy.
You know the rules of the House. So please respect them. I will report that to the President. And now the next speaker is colleague Kubilius.
Dear colleagues, despite all the tragic pictures from the region, we need not to forget that the main problem in the region is terrorism. Hamas, Hezbollah, ISIS, Iran. The fight against terrorism, which is occupying cities and regions, always was bloody. Let's compare liberation of Mosul in 2017 and situation in Gaza today. Mosul city had up to 12,000 ISIS terrorists, which were fighting against liberation of the city by American-led coalition. Liberation took 10 months. City was destroyed by heavy bombing. Up to 40,000 civilians were killed. Today, Hamas has up to 40,000 active fighters in Gaza. Numbers of casualties during liberation of Gaza are not very different from numbers in Mosul. Liberation of Mosul was welcomed by all the Western democratic world. If somebody knows how to avoid civilian casualties in the battles against terrorists who are occupying big cities, tell us. The victory in such a battle is needed not only for the security of Israel, but also for the future of Palestinian people. In order to create the proper future for Palestinian people, first of all, security of Israel should be guaranteed. That is why terrorism needs to be defeated. The Abraham Accords guaranteeing mutual security and development need to be signed, and Palestinian Arabs need to be helped to heal from paradigm of terrorism and influence of Iran. And only then, with the help of a secure Israel, we shall be able to assist the Palestinians in developing their ability to govern themselves. It's a long way to peace in the region, but the only way.
Dankeschön. Next Redner ist der Kollege Nemitz.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Mr. Nemec.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. The war in Gaza has been going on for more than 7 months. The number of victims has already exceeded 34,000. Last weekend alone, 139 people died in airstrikes. The Israeli army has withdrawn from the south of Gaza but continues to attack the area from the air. Western countries continue to supply Israel with weapons, and violence is escalating in the West Bank. Israel's provocation continues across borders. All calls for a lasting ceasefire continue to go unheeded. Security Council resolutions are not respected, nor is the Court of Justice, International Court of Justice in The Hague, and Israel continues to violate international law. The report of the inquiry into the operation of UNRWA showed that Israel has not produced evidence of serious allegations. These in turn have led to the freezing of funds for operations of UNRWA. All this is taking place in view of the world. The world watch helplessly. We need a ceasefire and release of the hostages. We need the unimpeded delivery of humanitarian aid. We need a halt to arms deliveries and an end to provocations. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Abir Al-Salami.
Thank you, Madam President, dear Commissioner, colleagues. Let me first establish some basic truths. The State of Israel has a right to exist. It has the right to defend itself. Netanyahu does not equal the entire Israel. Palestinian children, men and women, have the right to survive, to live, to thrive in peace and in dignity. Hamas does not equal the entire Palestine. Human rights is not a cake. One people's human rights does not mean that other people has to die. The ICJ, the world's highest judicial authority, has imposed provisional measures on the State of Israel, not once but twice. Measures that the State of Israel is obliged to follow. This House is not a court, but we can all see it. The ICJ has seen it. What is the world doing about it? What are we doing about it? If we have any morals left, or ethics, or even the slightest piece of empathy, the smallest thing that we can ask for and demand is a ceasefire now.
Dankeschön. Als nächstes spricht der Kollege Küff.
Thank you very much. Next, Mr. Cuff.
High Representative Borrell, a genocide is unfolding in Gaza, and EU hypocrisy is on full display. We're increasing sanctions against Iran for its attack on Israel, but when will Israel be sanctioned? Bombing civilians, killing journalists and aid workers, using starvation as a weapon, these are war crimes. Illegal and expanding settlements, a policy of apartheid, enough is enough. When will you, as Foreign Policy Chief, support efforts to recognise the State of Palestine? When will you convince countries to resume UNRWA funding? When will you suspend the EU-Israel agreement and ban arms exports? As long as the EU fails to act, it is complicit in the Gaza genocide. It makes a mockery of the values that we preach to the world and exposes us as hypocrites. History will not be kind.
Danke. Nächste Rednerin ist die Kollegin Demirel.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Mr. Demirel.
Dankeschön.
Thank you very much, Madam President. 7 months since the war in Gaza started, we've heard speeches here today in Parliament really leave a lot to be desired. What's happening in Gaza has nothing to do with self-defense. When hospitals are targeted, when 34,000 people are killed, when 1.5 million people are under threat of famine, then that is not, it's nothing other than a massacre. For months, we've seen the blockage of a ceasefire. And there is here, you have responsibility for what's happening in Gaza as a result. Often people here say that Israel is the only democracy in the region. We have an extreme far-right government in Israel. It's not about collateral damage or some border skirmishes. No, this is a government that has the aim to prevent an independent Palestine. And they want to prevent resistance in Palestine. So I'd say very clearly, if you say that you stand for a two-state solution, then you need to ensure that there's a Palestine that's on an equal footing. We need justice for Palestinians, and we need to have a ceasefire immediately.
Please stick to your speaking time. Nächster Redner ist der Kollege Kelly.
Next speaker is Mr. Kelly.
While the war in Gaza was sparked by Hamas's vicious terrorist attack in Israel, the situation in Gaza has now reached a critical juncture, and it is glaringly obvious that the principles of humanitarian law are being flagrantly disregarded. The disproportionate response by the Israeli authorities has led to the destruction of Gaza and the loss of countless innocent lives, including women and children. This cannot be justified under any circumstances. Defence has been replaced by vengeance and humanity replaced by callousness. In Aleppo, we saw entire neighbourhoods levelled. Putin continued his disregard for human life, again in Ukraine. How is the indiscriminate bombing in Gaza any different? Netanyahu and his government seem hell-bent on destroying not just the lives of Palestinians, but also everything that makes up Palestine. The horrifying discovery of mass graves at Nasser Hospital may just be the tip of the iceberg. We must halt this madness and halt this endless cycle of destruction. We need a ceasefire, and we need it now. Ireland and Spain asked the Commission in mid-February to examine whether Israel is respecting its human rights obligations in the EU-Israel Association Agreement. Why has the Commission done nothing about this request? Why the silence? Netanyahu has turned his back on the international community, and I speak for many of my constituents when I say that the EU cannot be complicit in Israel's disregard for innocent lives. A ceasefire, and a ceasefire now.
Dankeschön. Als nächster spricht der Kollege Sorinja.
Madam President, High Representative, international condemnation in general and EU condemnation specifically of the flouting of international humanitarian rights has increased the tone and even meant that we have got a resolution in the UN calling for a permanent humanitarian ceasefire. However, on the ground, the civilian and humanitarian catastrophe is getting worse. Every day, humanitarian workers, journalists, civilians, women and children are casualties of this war. And it seems to know no ethical or legal borders. Let's be practical, High Representative, and act with courage. I recognize this in you. I would like to know, for example, are we going to act to stop the weakening of things that we've seen, for example, with the World Central Kitchen attack? Are we going to act to stop the weakening reported to review the compliance of Israel's application of Article 2 of the Association Agreement with the European Union? When and how? Are we going to suspend the supply of weapons and ban illegal settlements? When and how? Thank you very much.
Nächster Redner ist der Kollege Groschel.
Thank you. Next speaker, Mr. Groschel.
Prihodnost Palestine in palestinskega naroda ostaja kljub tragediji, ki smo jo priča.
The future of Palestine is the key to peace and stability in the Middle East. The Israeli operation does not have any good aim. We're not going to find a solution through violence. What we see at the moment is journalists being killed, innocent people being killed. Some people speak of genocide, but that will be for others to judge. We are seeing protests, but that doesn't necessarily help. We need more analog diplomacy. We need to find a solution. We need a humanitarian ceasefire. We also need to see the hostages being released, and we can begin negotiations. But first, we need to end the violence. Thank you. Mrs. Alkin.
Thank you, President. The world in my time has not seen a worse attack than Israel's on Gaza, with hunger, thirst, and medicine as weapons. On top of the bombardments and shootings, 34,000 killed, half of them children. When emergency workers are killed, we lose our arms and legs in the disaster area, but also our eyes are blinded. Israel is denying journalists access to Gaza. which means that those who are already there are the only ones we have. And we have seen a grotesque amount killed. Soon we'll only have Hamas as our news source. Israel has to be pressured to let journalists get in. We all need their eyes so we can see what is actually happening. And EU has to put Gaza's and the West Bank's journalists included in EU's media freedom rapid response, like Ukraine's journalists. It is also urgent to have an independent examination of the many killings of journalists and get the responsible Israelis on EU sanctions list. Impunity is a pest in the conflict between Israel and Palestine. Thank you.
Pimenta Lopes.
Next, Pimenta Lopes.
Thank you, Madam President. We need to put an end to the genocide that Israel is currently wreaking in Gaza. We have to put an end to the slaughter. 6 months now, 34,000 Palestinians have died. Even more casualties. The majority are women and children, journalists, aid workers, hundreds of health workers, no access to water, to medicine, and there have been attacks against humanitarian workers. Infrastructure has been raised, attacks against hospitals, and one of the greatest aggressions in Gaza that has left the Gazan people between death or worse, and we have unpredictable consequences. There's profound hypocrisy here in the EU. Where is the energetic condemnation of Israel? Where are the sanctions? Enough of these empty words. We need to act as an immediate ceasefire, assistance to for humanitarian aid, a sovereign, independent country for Palestine with the borders as established, and to make sure that we comply with UN resolutions. Thank you.
Van Bremt.
Next, Mrs. Van Bremt.
Mevrouw de voorzitter, collega's. 34 dagen.
Thank you very much, President. Colleagues, 34,000 lives. This is the cost of the awful war in Gaza. This includes 12,000 children, and millions of children risk dying of hunger because there's a lack of humanitarian aid. The lack of response from the EU is unacceptable. What kind of signal does this give out to the family of all the families of all the people who were found in the mass grave last week? There are humanitarian workers who are dying while they're trying to save lives. What can we say to those people? Colleagues, we need to act. We need to act immediately. We need an immediate permanent ceasefire. But there's also something else we can use, our economic power. It's high time that the association agreement be put on the table and that it be suspended. This is a way of exerting pressure on Israel to force it what it needs to do. Thank you.
Mrs. Rafaela.
Ja, meer dan...
Thank you very much, President. This has been going on for 6 months now, where we have seen this horror. I still don't see any positive developments. I do not see an end to the violence. We are still seeing children and innocent people who are victims of this terrible war. Unfortunately, things are moving in the wrong direction. We see different reports, different analyses that are being made of the situation. It doesn't seem that there's any positive results coming out of this. For the first time, I will publicly say what I see, and I believe that there is an ongoing genocide. It is unbelievable to see people dying and suffering in this way, and that the international community cannot end this. It cannot continue in this way. And there is still no proof when it comes to UNRWA. Please provide proof. It is not okay that we keep sending out these messages. We need to insist that there is proof. Thank you. Mrs. Modig next.
Rouva puhemies.
Madam President, more than 200 aid workers and more than 100 journalists have died in the Israeli war action there. International law makes us to support, defend civilians, but Israel doesn't care. It's also evidenced by the number of Palestinians killed, most of them civilians, women and children. These figures tell either purposeful killings of civilians, of total that they do not just care because they have one of the most advanced armies. They could defend civilians if they so wanted, but it has been bombarding convoys, aid convoys, hospitals, and everything was clearly marked. Israel has made it impossible to help civilians, and this is shameful, and we cannot understand this. We have to impose large sanctions upon Israel until this cruelty stops. Member states such as Finland have to stop all arms exports to Israel before it follows the international rules and international law. We need a two-state solution.
More than 34,000 dead and 77,000 injured. This is the most recent data that we have after hundreds of days of war in Gaza, and the disaster continues. World Central Kitchen were killed recently by the IDF. We must state that it is a war crime and condemn this. Make sure that there's an investigation that brings those responsible to justice. Now, UNRWA has been accused by the Netanyahu government to have been a part of the 7th of October. There is no proof to support that. Independent analysis by Catherine Colonna states that the organization is fundamental. Europe must act immediately to make sure that there isn't an escalation and bring an immediate ceasefire, liberating all hostages being held by Hamas, an international conference on peace, and a UN mission in Gaza. We must work to put an end to this disaster. Thank you.
Thanks, Monsieur Weber.
Hvala. Tokrat vam ne bom pokazala
Thank you. This time, I'm not going to show the horrific photos from Gaza, not because I'm afraid of being interrupted, because it's not about the rules of the House, but it's because this time I'm going to describe to you with numbers a reality that even those of you who have turned a blind eye to my photographs must not hide from. Who cannot recognize the abnormal brutality of the genocide carried out by Israel in Palestine? More than 34,000 dead Palestinian men and women, more than 120 dead journalists, more than 220 dead humanitarian workers. This is the reality, and it's getting worse. Unjustified bombing is not uncontrolled. Israel is targeting hospitals and aid workers in a very targeted way. It's also targeting journalists in the form of fatal and definitive censorship, because what if nobody reports on the actions of the Israeli government? Shame on those of you who enable this, and shame on you for being able to watch the disintegration of humanity so calmly.
Thanks, Mrs. Villanueva Ruiz.
Fusiada. Hoy, mi cuerpo fue una masacre televisada.
We are seeing a massacre that is being televised. We do not hear about an occupation because it's politically incorrect. So we deplore this, we condemn this. We have the occupied and the occupiers. This matters. We're talking about 100, 200, 1,000 now, 30,000 dead. Is anyone there? Is anyone listening? We are seeing this televised massacre. So the UN resolutions do not say anything about that. We are seeing this colonization that was taking place. And Palestinians, they get up every day to show what life is. We are ending a European mandate which was very complicit in what was happening. Nothing was done to end the genocide and complicitness. I think you can be sure that we will continue to fight from these streets, and we will call for justice for Palestine. Thank you very much.
Dankeschön. Nächster Redner ist der Kollege Engerer.
Thank you very much. Next is Mr. Engerer.
Thank you, President. Saif ad-Din, Zomi, Damien, James Kirby, John, James Henderson, and Jacob, all killed in a single Israeli airstrike while they were doing their work in Gaza. But we were told that it's fine. The IDF informed everyone that it was a mistake. So now they expect that all should be forgiven, as if nothing ever happened. But let me send a clear message. We will not be swayed by hollow apologies and empty promises. No, we do not buy the notion that this was mere collateral damage in a so-called mistake. 34,000 innocent lives have been lost in Gaza. And here's a fact for those who try to always put this down, find excuses. Oh, they're not even here. The EPP, ECR, and the far right, the fascists are not here today. But 34,000 lives in Gaza, to put this in context, is 1,400,000 lives in Germany, 1,100,000 lives in France, 1 million lives in Italy, 9,000 in my country, Malta. But even if it were just one life, it would stand up to be counted for that lives. How many more lives need to be lost until we wake up to this genocide? Justice must be served. Justice means a ceasefire. Justice means that we recognize Palestine as a state so that Palestinians can live freely in peace and be able to live their lives to the full. Thank you.
Vielen Dank. Wir kommen jetzt zum Catch the Eye-Verfahren.
Thank you very much. We have 8 requests for the floor in Catch the Eye. We begin with Mr. Burgles. And then Mr. Castaldo.
Mike, please.
Več kot pol leta trajajoča brezvestna brutalnost oboroženih spopadov in najhujši mednarodni.
Thank you very much. The brutality of the 6-month armed conflict in Gaza is putting our humanity into question. In this conflict, we've seen 200 humanitarian workers lose their lives. This is the highest number of humanitarian worker victims in recent times, and we've seen significant numbers of children killed as well. Member states need to use all the tools they have at their disposal to encourage Israel to comply with the binding ruling of the International Court of Justice and take measures to prevent genocide as well. At the same time, I'm convinced that efforts to recognize the state of Palestine are an important step towards achieving dialogue between Israel and Palestine. And therefore, the resolution of the Security Council needs to be implemented. Thank you.
Castaldo is for.
Thank you very much. Mr. Castaldo, followed by Ms. Miranda.
Grazie, President. Thank you, President. More than 200 humanitarian workers, more than 100 journalists, 34,000 civilians, a half were children. This is hell that we've been watching for 7 months. It is brutal, but behind all of these numbers, there are stories. Families that have been broken, children who will never grow up. It is intolerable, and we see hundreds added to the list every day. Now, we have to put an end to this. How can we make sure that we start negotiations for a lasting ceasefire? We must go back to funding UNRWA before it is too late. It is fundamental to make sure that the Palestinian people and that Hamas specifically frees all of the hostages, and that the Netanyahu renounces the attack on Rafah and also renounces on the troops from the Gaza Strip. Leadership on both sides have shown that they are incapable of assisting, working for the good of their people. We have to look for the future now. An international peace conference, the only solution, a political one, two free, safe states living side by side. Ceasefire now.
Spricht die Kollegin Miranda. Es folgt danach.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker is Miranda and then Wallace.
Parar este genocidio. Las calles europeas nos están diciendo.
Thank you, President. We need to stop this genocide. Year after year, month after month, week after week, we are calling for this genocide to be stopped. You know, President, that we've been calling for ever more action, sanctions, recognition of Palestine, humanitarian aid, the expulsion of the Israeli embassies. We're not allowed to enter their territory. We need to expel the embassies and the consulates. We need to have proper access for humanitarian aid. Israel and Netanyahu simply don't want anyone to see in the outside world what is going on. You see mothers with dead children in their arms. This should be a stain on our consciousness. We should be ashamed of it. The European Union have got to take action. We have failed to get a ceasefire. There are limits, surely. The humanitarian access is woeful. Humanitarian workers are being killed. I have honestly never seen anything like this, and it is shocking that this legislature is ending this week, and we have still not managed to call for an absolute end to this impunity, the recognition of Palestine, and a ceasefire. Thank you.
Wallace, es kann sich breit.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace and Ms. Arena.
Over 6 months, more than 100,000 casualties. Over 6 months and more than 100,000 casualties in Gaza, and now you want to talk about an EU response. The EU response is to funnel weapons to the genocidal apartheid regime, provide diplomatic cover for their crimes, and cry crocodile tears for the massacred children, while defending an occupying power's non-existent right to attack the people of the land they occupy. With Russia, you all remembered how to apply international law and more. It extended to Russian novelists, dog shows, any sport you can imagine. But as Israel murders more children than in any global conflict in all of it in the last 5 years, you couldn't even muster one sanction. This is the EU's Madeleine Albright moment. Is the slaughter of tens of thousands of children a price worth paying to maintain EU interest? It looks like the answer is yes. Sadly, settler colonialism, apartheid and genocide are integral to the order that built and sustains the EU.
Next Rednerin ist die Kollegin Arena.
The next speaker is Ms. Arena, and following that, Mr. Rodriguez Ramos.
Representative, this will be probably my final intervention in the plenary, and I have to speak about the situation in Gaza. I'm very sad with these words, and I know that you echo that we are witnesses of genocide, and it's not us who is saying this, it's a genocide which has been set out as such by the International Court of Justice. The Special Rapporteur for the UN for Palestine has also said the same. The fact that they've called this a genocide, they have been threatened in doing so, threatened for saying the truth about what's going on in Gaza. Knowing this bit is one thing, but now being complicit is something else. And we are complicit in this genocide because the European Union is not acting against this genocide. We need to take the measures required. Now, I know that you are making efforts in this area, but the Council needs to put an end to the association agreement. We need to stop delivering weapons to Israel. We need to continue supporting international investigations which are being committed in Gaza. In order to achieve this, there needs to be court proceedings against those who haven't used all of the powers available to them to stop the genocide in Gaza.
Erst folgt die Kollegin.
Thank you. Next speaker is Ms. Rodriguez Ramos.
Borrell,
Thank you very much. Mr. Borrell, I'd like to express my thanks to you, and I'd like to express My thanks to you for your coherence and persistence, particularly in very difficult moments. We're grateful to having you speaking on our behalf. There is effectively a genocide underway. The International Court has recognized that this is quite possibly taking place in Gaza in the hands of the Israelis, and therefore we should be acting on the basis of the genocide connection, and we should have been doing everything we can to prevent this. We should be stopping this sending of arms, imposing sanctions on Israel, and I think, frankly, we should also be suspending the association agreement. We haven't done that, and right now the tanks are on the verge of Rafah. If they enter Rafah, then we will realise that what we have seen before is nothing to what we are about to witness. I think that Israel is doing this precisely because it's got the necessary support. Therefore, we have to do the right thing, and we have to stop any support now. The people who are on the ground say they've never seen anything like it. There are words fail them to describe the horrors that they witness every single day. We need to bring the perpetrators of these criminals before the court and every single person who is enabling that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rodriguez Ramos. Mark Botenga is next.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam President. These days in Gaza, there are mass graves everywhere. This is the evidence of genocide. Sometimes they're wearing medical uniforms. Some of them are victims of summary execution. Children shredded bodies. The European Union, what is it doing? It has been promising Israel millions. There's no arms embargo. It could do it now. We've got embargoes, military sanctions on Belarus, Central African Republic, Iran, Libya, Myanmar, Russia, Somalia, Sudan, South Sudan, Syria, Venezuela, Turkey, Yemen, Zimbabwe, but not Israel. Israel is safe. Israel's colonial project is defended by the imperialist European Union, and the massacre of Palestinians wouldn't be possible without European Union complicity. I'd like now to give the floor to Monica Silvana Gonzalez.
Thank you, Madam President. I don't want to leave this chamber without thanking Mr. Borrell for his clear message. This stands along with the support of the Spanish government in their support for Palestine, and this is important when we go out onto the street and ask for the trust of European voters for the next legislature. We denounce war crimes, destruction of hospitals, the use of famine as a weapon of war, and others. As we denounce all of these, but yet we've still taken no concrete action against the government of Israel. The only thing that the Israeli government can understand is sustained pressure from the international community. We are one of the largest donors. We should use our economic power to exert even more pressure on Israel. We need to increase financial support for the UNRWA. We also need to look at the association agreement. We need to suspend this association agreement with Israel. We're just a few weeks away from the European elections. We cannot have double measured. In the past 6 months, we've moved into specific measures. We're same to do with Russia and others.
Thank you. And now to conclude the debate, High Representative Vice President of the European Commission, Mr. Borrell.
Todos estamos hablando de un tema.
Thank you. This is a particularly sensitive topic, and we are talking, of course, about life and death of many people. We are talking about a conflict which is pitting two peoples against each other, each of which believes that they are the rightful inhabitants and occupants of a particular piece of land, and this has been going on for decades. Obviously, emotions run high, and at times we may perhaps allow our emotions to run away with us. This can happen, and it can happen that emotions sometimes get the better of reason. But what we have to realise is that we're no victims of a terrorist attack. We have not been murdered. Our families have not been murdered. Our houses have not been razed to the ground. And yet, look at the level of emotion that we've witnessed in this debate, and look at the heightened tensions and the heated debate that we've had. Therefore, imagine, colleagues, how the people who are actually the victims of this horrendous drama actually feel on both sides. And therefore, my role has got to be one of facilitating the most accurate information I can to you, to enable you to identify the appropriate criteria for action and the political strategy that you feel you should adopt. We have discussed at great length Ms. Colonna's report, and our former colleague from the French Foreign Minister has done a report which was commissioned by the UN, and she says that it is important to recognise that it stands as an independent report, and it should not be confused with the UN independent report, which is looking at allegations and accusations against individuals in the context of the controversy surrounding UNRWA and their UNRWA funding. Now, Ms. Colonna has said a number of very clear things. UNRWA is absolutely indispensable and absolutely irreplaceable in the area where it operates. It is indispensable and irreplaceable. It provides services to all Palestinians the region over, and that is millions of people who rely entirely on it. And I really do want to underline that, and I want to repeat it, because UNRWA has procedures and auditing and control mechanisms which are unimpeachable, and in terms of neutrality and objectivity, they're comparable with the other institutions and agencies of the UN. And therefore, I think it's very important that we take note of that. Of course, there are areas, as Catherine Colonna says, where there's potential for improvement. She's identified 8 areas in particular where she perceives there could be improvement delivered by the 50 recommendations that she has provided. But she equally says in her report that Israel has not actually provided evidence to prove the allegations that any agents of UNRWA are members of a terrorist agency, as has been asserted.
Significant number of UNRWA employees are members of terrorist organizations. Israel has yet to be providing supporting evidence of this. Todavía eso tiene que ser demostrado.
This has not as yet been shown. So let us abide by the facts and operate on that basis. And as I have said, there are 2 separate reports here. We must not confuse the one with the other. And as to the reality on the ground, you have described the grim realities yourselves. I have said this time and time again. One horror and aggression of this type can never justify another, and we need to work tirelessly to try to resolve the dramatic situation that's there. We need to do absolutely everything that we possibly can. If we could possibly achieve a suspension of the hostilities that would lead to a permanent ceasefire, that would be progress. If we could facilitate the entry of massive quantities of humanitarian aid, that would be a big achievement. This is not happening just now. And we have also got to focus on the liberation, the freeing of the hostages, clearly, but this has got to be part of a wider political process which will enable us to reach a solution. This is, as I say, a standoff and a conflict which has been going on for decades, since the last century, and the 2 peoples obviously need to have separate areas in which they can live, because it's clear that they can't live together, but they need to be able to live in peace and security, both of them, simultaneously, contemporaneously. And this is what we are working towards. Colleagues, what can I say? This is a very divisive issue. In the European Union, the member states don't all vote in the same way. The same is true of the United Nations, and we will see this no doubt in the UN when the proposal for the recognition of Palestine as to become a full member as opposed to an observer comes, when the motion proposing this comes to the floor of the House in the UN. But we need to try to vanquish emotion, and we need to try to work on the basis of reason, the rule of law, respect for human rights, to do everything we can to try to overcome this terrible, terrible tragedy, which is obviously raising great emotions and tensions here, and so much more there on the ground. Of course, we condemn all the terrible terrorist attacks, and we mourn the victims. It is a tragedy that a democratic state such as the country of Israel would be using such violence to defend itself, that it would perceive it that such tragic actions are actually compatible with international law and humanitarian law and protection of human rights. This is the big question which the international community is asking itself. Is there any way that this is justifiable? We have institutions which debate this. We have the International Court of Justice to review this. This is why we have courts, and we have international courts with the experts who can analyse what is happening on the ground from a legal perspective in order to identify the dictates of international law which apply. I am not an expert in this. It's not my role. It's not your role. But our role is to work on the basis of the facts as they exist on the ground, to try to find a political solution, a political way forward, in any event, towards a solution. And that's what we're here to do. And I'd like to thank you for the debate that we've had today. This is, I'm sure, the last debate that this Parliament will have on this topic. And I feel that both within and out with this House, where the peoples of Europe are represented, we need to work tirelessly to try to ensure that the peoples of Palestine and Israel can all live in peace in secure boundaries in their own territory. Thank you.
Paljon kiitos, korkea edustaja.
Thank you very much indeed, High Representative. That brings to an end this debate, and now we'll hear a statement by the Vice President of the Commission, High Representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, on the use of Russian frozen assets to support Ukraine's victory and reconstruction. And here I give the floor to the High Representative once again.
Señora Presidencia,